this is the way in, this is how you explain sleep deprivation, or this is how you explain having muscles that don't tire out as quickly.
Actually, it's the human stories here, it's the women that I'm really fascinated by. Can we expand those stories and use them as a way into these topics?
Hello and welcome to Outlines, a podcast about sport, stories and the media. My name's Owen Connolly, hope you're well. It is great to have you listening. So there's a lot of reasons why so many of us are interested in stories about sport. But ultimately, I think it's because they're about people, what animates us, what brings us together, and sometimes, on a very fundamental level, what our physical bodies are capable of doing, and the confounding things that can reveal. Our guests, we've got two this time, are freelance journalists and longtime friends who've produced one of the most remarkable sports books of 2025. Lily Canter writes mostly about running. Emma Wilkinson specialises in health, medicine and biosciences. And together, they've taken their complementary perspectives to ask just why it is that female athletes seem to be outperforming expectations and men in a welter of ultra-endurance challenges. The product of their collaboration is Ultra Women, the Trailblazers Defying Sexism in Sport. They spoke to scientists and coaches and compiled dozens of gutsy, grisly, and surprisingly joyous stories of women who've gone to the absolute limit and beyond, then just a little further. And the resulting combination of personal accounts and physiological research has captured a lot of attention. We talked about how the book evolved, the influence of their own experiences as ultra runners, and what they learned about other ultra endurance communities. And we also talked about what's happened since publication. Ultra Women was shortlisted for the William Hill Sportsbook of the Year award. It's received similar accolades from The Guardian and The Times, and it's on a fair few Christmas gift guides at the time of recording. So what does that tell us about the appetite for sports stories about women, by women, and whether it's time to tackle some of the conventional wisdom in this space? There is a lot to get to. Before that, as always, a note to say that if you're enjoying the podcast, I'd really appreciate your support in getting the word out. Subscribe, rate and review on your platform of choice. Get involved in social media, details as ever in the show notes. Stick your headphones over a stranger's ears like Natalie Portman in Garden State, whatever it takes. If you're listening to these week to week, we've got one more before a little break over Christmas. I'm really grateful to everyone who's been listening. It's been a lot of fun so far, and there's more to come right now. Here are Emma Wilkinson and first, Lily Canter. So I want to kind of get a sense of what kind of people I'm dealing with here, given the subject matter of the book. I'm looking outside. It is disgusting out there today. It's cold, it's wet, it's dark, there's kind of mud and like kind of late autumn leaf sludge underfoot. So I suppose the important question is, have either of you been for a run today?
Yes. Yeah, I was out at 9 o'clock this morning after the school run in the wind and the rain with my dog. I love this time of year. It's a really good time for running because it's just not really hot. After the summer, you want a bit of welcome relief.
Yeah, how about you, Emma?
I haven't. I have been sat at my desk since 6:30 this morning.
Oh, wow.
Really busy today. But I did do 2 runs at the weekend. And I like this time of year. There's no bad weather. It's just having the right kit, right? The right shoes.
So is that a Scandinavian expression? I feel like there's no such thing as bad weather. There's only bad clothes or something like that.
Yeah, I think so. They always know how to dress, don't they, for the bad weather.
We're going to get into the kind of experience you guys have had putting the book out there in the last year, but what's the day job for each of you now? You're both kind of freelance journalists in the world of running, but what does that look like for you?
Yeah, we're both sort of slightly different. I wear probably slightly more hats than Emma. So I guess the bulk of my income is as a freelance journalist specialising in running. I'm also a running coach. I also do a bit of teaching on a sports journalism course. And then Emma and I run Freelancing for Journalists, which is a community for freelance journalists.
Yeah. So actually, when I'm mainly freelance journalism, but I'm not normally writing about running. My beat is normally health and medicine. I'm writing for kind of specialist titles, so it's kind of more of a sciencey background for me.
So I feel like we've got a little hint there about what brought the two of you together on this project in particular, because it's kind of the book is kind of half, well, it's not half anything, but you know what I mean. It's partly, the stories are partly about the just insane kind of personal sacrifices and shall we say perspectives on discomfort that people have that you know push them to do these things in the ultra performance world, but also some physiological preconceptions that women in particular are also breaking through when it comes to ultra running and ultra competing. But what is the sort of the background? How did this project originate?
Well, yeah, I mean, Lily and I have been friends for 20 years. We met doing our journalism degree, and kind of more latterly our careers had come together a bit. We were doing more teaching at the same university in journalism. And I'd always done running, but Lily had started doing some running, and she'd got me into doing ultras. And it was sort of on this new world that we were exploring of ultra running, and on these kind of really long days out where you're kind of out for 6, 7, 8 hours, where we would start talking about projects that we wanted to do together. So we'd written a textbook, a journalism textbook before together. So we knew we worked well together, but we started to knock around ideas about running. And I think through some of the stories like Jasmine Paris that had been in the mainstream media about women winning races outright, basically, or breaking records, and partly what we were seeing in the ultra events that we were doing, in it being a much more even playing field between the men and women that were there, kind of this idea just started to evolve of, you know, can we do a really deep dive into all the reasons why that may be, but telling it through these stories that are completely untold, that even those in this niche world don't even know most of them.
Yeah. Just to broaden that perspective a bit, I mean, you mentioned Jasmine Paris there, but for the benefit of someone who's not familiar with this world, what achievement are we talking about there?
Yeah, so Jasmine Paris won in 2019, won the Montaigne Winter Spine Race, which is a 260-mile race from Edale in the Peak District up the Pennine Way to Scotland, basically. And she broke the record at the time. She beat everybody else, including the men, in that race, and she was breastfeeding her 14-month-old daughter on the way round. It was a brutal year. It was really cold, and there were lots of factors that played into her being able to win that race. She's a phenomenal athlete, but she's also very prepared. She had made good decisions around kit and sleep deprivation and kind of when to push herself, and, you know, that had played to her advantage. And she really did hit the headlines all over the world. BBC, you know, she was being retweeted by, is it Barbara Streisand, Lily? Yeah, so it really did capture the imagination. But I think, you know, she's perhaps the most famous. Definitely if you're in this world, and if you're not in this world, you may have heard of her. But there are so many others. This didn't start with Jasmine Paris. It goes back forever, which is kind of what we wanted to explore in the book as well.
Yeah. It's nice to have a conversation with phrases like good decisions around sleep deprivation. While you were talking about this on your, whether it was out on your runs or whatever else, how did the kind of shape that it took begin to form for you? Where did you think, you know, because there's different ways you could take it. You could do something that was very focused on the science, or you could do something where you're following one story, or you could do, you know, how did you kind of hash that out?
Yeah, that really evolved once we had a publisher. So we initially were having discussions with one publisher that was very much focused just on ultra running and this kind of idea of, are women faster than men in the long run? There is a piece of research that indicates that, but it's never really, they've never released their data, so it's not necessarily the most kind of robust study. But that was kind of the central hook, I suppose, for the book. And we were having those discussions. Ironically, that publisher in the end decided not to commission the book. The feedback we were given were that there weren't enough women in the world of ultra running to buy the book, and men wouldn't buy a book about women. So it was a bit of a slap in the face, really, because we'd had a male editor champion the book, and then we had sort of a group of female marketers were saying, well, only men buy sports books anyway, and this is too niche, so we're not interested. And we kind of then sat on it for about a year. We kind of pushed it out to other publishers, and we had a lot of people saying, it was a really interesting topic, but they're not really focusing on these kind of books, and they're more interested in memoirs and personal takes. And it was actually kind of, I suppose, a bit serendipitous, because another publisher, the one we actually went with in the end, Canterbury Press, they contacted me because they had an idea for another book that they were seeing if I'd be interested in writing, because they knew I wrote about running. And I immediately said, well, actually, I'm not really interested in writing that, but here is a book that I'm really interested in writing with Emma, and gave them the proposal. And they immediately were interested. They were like, we've never even kind of heard this kind of idea that, the gap narrows between men and women. But they understood that it was niche because it is ultra endurance. And they actually made the suggestion that we broaden it beyond running, and that, we looked at any kind of super endurance sport, like the really long stuff. And that, I think, in a way unlocked the whole book, really, because then suddenly we could be talking about lots of different things. And there's certainly certain sports like swimming where women have really like specific advantages due to their body fat. So there were lots of different aspects we could delve into. And we wrote the first couple of chapters, and to be honest, at first they were quite like, they were heavy on the fact. Because we were really digging into the data. And again, it was sort of our editor that came in and said, actually, it's the human stories here, it's the women that I'm really fascinated by. Can we expand those stories and use them as a way into these topics? So we went back and kind of rewrote a couple of chapters. And once we had like that formula that we were happy with and the editor was happy with, that's when it kind of, again, sort of unlock the whole book, really, and it became much more straightforward to write it. But it was definitely an evolution, and we did feel like we were trying to cover like so many different aspects, and it's really difficult to describe what the book is actually about, because we're kind of covering it from historical angle. We're looking at the physiology, the psychology, the sociology, and telling the stories of these incredible women. But in a way, I think it just kind of became almost the manifesto that's at the end of the book. Like, this is our manifesto about why we need to champion women in endurance, and kind of the barriers that are still kind of in their way.
Yeah. But did that focus on those personal stories? Did it also help you get a handle on the information, and because it is quite disparate, but also, like you say, there's some evolving research there. There's only so many people who put themselves through this stuff and are built to cope with the demands of it. Did it give you, a little bit more of a boundary, more of a definition in terms of where each of these parts kind of settled, because they settled around individual cases?
Yeah, I mean, I think very much so. And it became, once we had those sample chapters, we knew it was stories first, that every chapter would open with the story. So we had a list of women through our research across kind of cycling, swimming, adventure sport. We were coming across women that we'd not heard of before all the time, because other people we're interviewing were suggesting examples. And I think it was through those interviews that you're like, yes, you need to be the start of this kind of chapter. This is the way in, this is how you explain sleep deprivation, or this is how you explain having muscles that don't tire out as quickly. And so, yeah, I think once we started having those interviews, and overall we did more than 70 interviews when we added it up for the book across athletes and scientists and physios and everybody. So there was a huge amount of work there. But I think it did become much clearer once we started having those conversations.
Yeah. And let's why don't you just kind of give a sample of some of the stories that we're talking about there? What were some of the ones that jumped out to you as you were working your way through this?
Yeah, I think for us, Jasmine Paris is a really strong figure, and we used her to kind of bookend the book because we did feel like she was the most well-known person and is kind of, almost like a legend in the sport. But actually it was the stories we didn't know. For me, I think, well, there was two really. There was Lynn Cox, who was the swimmer who sort of in the 70s and 80s was a real pioneer in open water swimming. She's American. I hadn't heard her story, and she was doing world first. She was swimming in places people had never swum before, in temperatures people didn't think it was possible to swim in, breaking boundaries. And yet kind of all the time there was this like underlying sexism in all the reporting, and that she was kind of just lucky in some way, or even like not really getting reported on at all, and not kind of really been taken very seriously. And she was just obviously an incredible athlete, and also just happens to be like the nicest person on the planet. So she was absolutely lovely to interview, and even to this day, I think she's in her early 60s, and when we interviewed her, she'd like literally just walked out of the sea because she'd been for a sea swim just before our interview, and she like still had wet hair. She's almost like a mermaid. She's just like always in the sea. So I think her story was just really inspiring. And the other was actually a group of Australian women who were adventure racers, who were in a team of 4, and they kind of showed the real kind of social element of teamwork and how women tend and befriend rather than fight or flight. And they were a really good example of that in this particular race, where they were having a really tough time and supported each other through it. And yet again, there was kind of huge amount of inbuilt sexism into the design of the race, because only a mixed team could qualify for the World Championships, and they won their race, and because they were a team of women, they couldn't qualify. Yet if it had been a team of 3 men and 1 woman, that would have qualified. So it's like this inbuilt bias. But they were just, again, a great bunch of kind of women in their 40s and 50s that were just like tough as nails, but just working cohesively as a team. And again, they were great to talk to just kind of see what they're achieving and kind of how much fun they have in these, week-long adventures where they're kayaking and cycling and running and just going from like checkpoint to checkpoint. They were really incredible.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was so much enthusiasm among all the women that we spoke to that it was kind of infectious, really, and they were all so keen to talk to us. We didn't have any difficulties kind of finding people to talk to. I think for me, Lyle Wilcox kind of most embodied that, because she's a cyclist, ultra cyclist, and she won the Trans Am race from the west coast to east coast of America in 2016, and she just perfectly described turning up to this race. She'd been cycling all over the world, but she wasn't kind of a name. No one knew who she was. She'd been entering competitions and doing really well in them. And she just kind of rocked up in her kind of plain t-shirt and shorts, and everybody was there in all their super cycling kit, kind of wondering who she was. And she just slowly picked them off, just like over the course of this few weeks while she was doing this race. Getting to the front, and then when she did get to the front, she was very competitive about it, and I'll kind of let people read the book to get the full story. But she's so enthusiastic about her sport, and I think that's really, even though you're not going to get me on a bike, but it is quite infectious. She was just a joy to speak to.
Yeah. And I mean, you've talked a little bit about the sort of process of referral and everything else when it came to finding these stories, but where did you find people to talk to, and what does that tell you as people who are coming from the ultra running community into some of these other spaces, but also kind of a reader or an observer from the outside, what these communities are like?
Yeah, I mean, I think we obviously, there was people we knew and we kind of had our wish list. And then when we interview people, just like naturally, they would sort of suggest other people we just could speak to. I mean, we did do a lot of Googling. We wanted women who had won races outright or set world firsts. So we sort of had criteria, and, you know, as journalists, we were sort of able to hunt them down and get in contact with them. And there were also people like I'd done stories about in the past that we were able to reach out to. And I think, I mean, what we found was just these women were just kind of quietly getting on with it. And a lot of them are not on social media. That's the other thing. They're not kind of shouting about what they're doing. They are committing a lot of time to their training whilst also juggling careers, quite often juggling families as well. They're not out there on social media at all. But they are known and kind of really well respected within their own communities. But there's certainly, you know, they're all very, very humble and all kind of had a sense of like they felt really privileged to be able to do these things. And yeah, I do wonder if, you know, if the tables were turned and we were looking at stories of male athletes, whether that would have been quite the same. But yeah, they did all just seem to be just like quietly kind of cracking out their world records.
I mean, what were some of the other through lines there? Because, you know, it feels like these are people who are just doing this because there's something in them that's compelling them to keep pushing these limits, but there aren't the same external factors, whether that's validation or, you know, obviously fame and money and all the other kind of things that kind of recur elsewhere in the sports industry. Like what was were there kind of characteristics that you were struck by that they shared, or motivations that they shared? What did you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, they were all obviously women who were up for a challenge, but I think the really common theme across all of them was not that they set out necessarily to win every time, or even when it came to breaking records, they kind of just wanted to see if they could.
Yeah,
it was a kind of very intrinsic motivation. They didn't have sponsorship. They didn't have, you know, there weren't big prizes. They really enjoyed being outside in nature, often enjoyed being in the mountains, and yeah, just I think wanted the challenge, or just thought, let's see if I can do this. And along the way, you know, we have stories of those of women who did eventually break a record, or do something amazing, but they'd had lots of failures along the way that they were learning from. So it wasn't just kind of, I'm going to do this one thing and do it the first time perfectly. It was, oh, so it didn't work out this time for whatever reason. What lessons do I need to take away from that and apply that to the next time? And I'm going to keep going. And then once they'd done that challenge, they didn't necessarily want to do more of the same. It's kind of, what in this world can I do that tests a different part of my skills? Or, you know, it's some, you know, it takes me to a different part of the world, or whatever it might be. They're not kind of repeating these things over and over. Their mind goes to the next thing because it is about the challenge, I think, rather than any kind of accolade or award.
Yeah, I think it was very personal for many of them. But that's not to say they're not competitive as well. Like, put them in a race and they would be competitive, but they're not doing it to be competitive. You know, in this world, like Emma says, there isn't really prize money, and certainly all the sponsorship is very much, again, in favor of men. It was very much sort of personal challenge, and it's not like they were fighting demons or anything like that. It was just, they were all very kind of determined women who wanted to push themselves or wanted to go and have an adventure. I mean, quite a few of them were high achievers. You could see that you get a lot of doctors and vets or people quite high up in the world of business. And obviously these, some of these challenges do take a lot of money and you do have to be, quite privileged to be able to take them on. But certainly that wasn't everybody. There was a range of backgrounds, but I guess they all had this kind of drive to test the limits, like see where the limits lie. And they didn't feel there was any reason why they shouldn't or they wouldn't be able to. So they kind of had that confidence, I suppose, as well. Yeah.
I mean, how consistent is that with your personal experiences of ultra running and the ultra running community? I mean, it's a world of kind of blisters and bruises and early starts. There's not a lot of kind of fun or glamour in it, but I suppose it has its own intrinsic appeal. Is that something that you recognized in these people when from experiences you'd had or people you'd known in the past?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's quite addictive also. Once you've done your first ultra, I don't know if I've ever met anyone who's done an ultra and not gone back to do another. But I also think there's something, at least at the moment in the field, so for most races, so on average across the UK, let's say in ultra races, the makeup of women on the start line is about 20%. So those that are there at the moment do have a lot of self-confidence, I would say, for the most part, and have probably been running for a long time and have built up to ultra running or have been doing hiking or walking. They've had a lot of experience prior to this. They've not just launched into ultra running, tend to be a bit older, perhaps. So it's kind of setting themselves new challenges and perhaps life experiences helping them have the resilience to do this kind of thing. But I think what we wanted to address in the book as well is why do we have that 20-80 split? I mean, in cycling, it's even worse. I think it's more like 10% of women on the start line in kind of your longer ultra cycling events, because it is more evenly matched in marathon now, and the shorter down the distances, the more that kind of flips around. So we did want to address those barriers as well. I mean, we did our own survey as part of the book, actually, that showed that women who do running, who've run like half marathons, who were saying, oh, could never do an ultra. And some of it is about time, and some of it is about confidence. There's a huge piece here about confidence, because you can't be what you can't see.
Yeah.
So it's this self-fulfilling prophecy, this vicious cycle. And that's part of, what we wanted to really address in the book, because a lot of these stories are hidden. So unless you go out and have the confidence to kind of put yourself on the start line or know someone who's done it who can help you get there, it is a very hidden world. And particularly so if you're a woman, I think.
Yeah. And I think the other aspect that we haven't really touched on is the sense of community within these kind of races. And it's certainly something that I think, again, the women in the book were kind of drawn to, that even though they were being competitive, there is still a sense of everyone is kind of in it together. There was an example earlier in the year of actually back in the last year that there was a load of women that were competing in the Spine race, which is this 268-mile race that Jasmine Paris previously won. They were all competing in it, but before the race, there was a whole group of them that went out training together and did a recce of the route together.
Yeah.
And so it was that sense of like community. Yes, on the start line, we're going to be competing, but that doesn't mean we can't help each other in training. It doesn't mean on the race we can't kind of give each other moral support. And I think that is very much the nature of, certainly of trail running, but I suspect that's the same in all kind of endurance sport, where you're out for such a long time and it can be quite a lonely and isolating sport, that if there are others around you, you do tend to draw together and you draw support of each other. And it's not like a road race. It's like the complete opposite of a, elbows out road race. It's, it's sharing your snacks and, telling people like, where the next checkpoint are, or shouting at them if they're going the wrong way. And it's a much different vibe to road racing, and it is more of an experience rather than a race. And again, even those at the front of the pack are doing it for kind of the love of being in the outdoors, and kind of the competition is almost secondary to that.
Yeah, and I suppose the scale of the challenge is such that, you know, if you're running even a marathon for regulars, you know, you're going to get round. But if you're running a trail that you've never seen before, or you're kind of pushing your body to a limit it's never approached before, then you're then having that kind of company and collaborative spirit can be really helpful. What got the two of you into ultra running?
I think Lily should answer this because she got me into ultra running.
It was sort of accidental, if I'm completely honest. So I was never a runner. Emma was, but I had joined, for some reason, I joined a triathlon club. I know I interviewed someone who ran a local triathlon club, and he basically convinced me to join it somehow. And I thought, well, that sounds a bit different, a bit of this, a bit of that. I like swimming. So I joined that club, and I actually kind of soon realised that I really didn't like triathlon very much, but there was a really good running coach, and he really kind of sparked my love of running. I'd done bits of running because I played netball, and I kind of ran to stay fit for netball, but I found it a real slog and found it really boring, and I wasn't really very good at it. But once I got some proper coaching and started training properly and training differently, and just kind of adding a lot more variety and fun to my training, I sort of fell in love with running quite quickly and started getting a lot faster. And then I was introduced again through the club to trail running. And so I signed up to a race that was basically a looped race through some woods near me. And you can do as many loops as you want within 6 hours. And I went along thinking, at that point, I think I'd done a 20-mile race. I thought, maybe I'll do like 23 miles, see how close I can get to marathon distance, because I was still very much on a kind of a road race. You know, one day I'll do a marathon. Anyway, I did this looped event, and it was like, you do a loop, you stop and have some sandwiches, you do a loop, you grab some crisps, you do a loop, you grab some sweets, and it was all just so relaxed. So before I knew it, I'd run 30 miles. And I was like, oh, this is actually really quite fun. And this is nothing like a road race, which is just like head down slog, try and keep on your pace, quite stressful. It was just so much more relaxed. And so I then said to Emma, do you know what? I think you'd like this. We should sign up to a race together. And that's kind of where it started, really. So I dragged Emma along to the next one we did. And we were like, oh, this is so much more civilized than road running. It's a day out with a picnic, with a bit of running thrown in. And sort of spiraled from there, really.
So it's an addictive quality, but also better catering.
Yes.
At these things.
Yes. You do judge a race on its aid stations, like how good the food is.
Yeah, for me, I really enjoy not looking at the pace. Like, if you're doing an ultra, you've got no idea what it's all about. Are you going to finish it?
Yeah.
Your watch is kind of on your map most of the time, navigating. No idea what time of day it is, or kind of what you're just getting to the next thing. It's quite problem solving and kind of tuning into your body. If you need to walk for a bit, you walk for a bit. You walk up most of the hills anyway. It's kind of a mental game. I cannot explain to you how different it is from a road marathon, which I've only done one of and hated. So
yeah. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about this from the kind of publishing perspective, because you made the shortlist for the William Hill Sportsbook of the Year, which is a fantastic achievement. But I wanted to talk to you, I suppose, Lily, more about running journalism as opposed to sports journalism more generally, because, you know, I have covered all sorts of things in the past, primarily from a kind of business perspective. I'm not a part of the world in the same way. I'm a part of the audience. I feel like from just the way that the running industry is structured, you're writing to and for people who are kind of peers because you're a runner as well, and B, they are participants more often than not. They might be some personal interest stories of the kind that you're telling in the book, where it's sort of, there's a fascination to it from that dimension, but really it's people looking for a sense of community and looking for a way of improving themselves. I mean, is that a fair assessment of how those two worlds compare, or how would you?
Yeah, I think to a large extent it is. I mean, obviously you do have like the publications that will focus on the professional sport, like your Athletics Weekly that will report on, big races, championships, things like that. And to be honest, I don't cover any of that. Like, I don't do any what I would call athletics. So no track and field, no road races. I don't really report on that. I'm very much focused on trail running and more and more sort of ultra running and women. But yeah, it's very much for participants. So the audience are not fans as such, they're participants. So in that respect, I don't view myself as a sports writer or a sports journalist. It does fit much more, I suppose, into maybe lifestyle or health and fitness. There's obviously crossover, and you may do interviews with athletes, but again, it's not really about their performance necessarily. It's probably more just those inspirational stories to get other people out there doing, or to learn tips and tricks from what they've done. So yeah, it's very different in that respect to a lot of sports reporting.
Yeah. And I mean, how did that lend itself then to the way that you were telling the stories in the book? Because I mean, there's details like, poking at sores to keep yourself awake and that kind of thing, which feels like it's a little more on the kind of gonzo side of things, but the sort of technical running tips. But I mean, you know the audience better than me. But like, what did you have to slightly shift your mindset, particularly as the book began to change in that respect?
I don't know that we did necessarily, but I think because we had that combined skill set that, we were telling the stories of the athletes, which I think probably does, align itself with a lot of the features that I write anyway.
Yeah.
But it was more how we addressed the science and how we brought the science to life. And I guess that's kind of more Emma's realm. But we certainly did have to think quite carefully about like the narrative structure of the book and not writing it as journalists. I think that was the biggest shift. It was thinking of ourselves as like authors rather than journalists, because journalism is quite formulaic. And actually we had more, I think, artistic license in the book.
Yeah.
And that was kind of more of a, I think for me anyway, was kind of having to kind of shift and be like, try and kind of be more descriptive, I think, in setting the scenes as well. And it was really interesting because we went back to all the athletes and kind of showed them what we'd written, because we wanted to make sure they were kind of on board with how we'd interpreted it. And quite often they were like, this makes it sound really dramatic, because to them it's just quite mundane. They're quite blasé about it, and they don't necessarily like see it as this kind of incredible or surreal or extraordinary thing. So yeah, it was quite interesting to see that they were kind of so like, oh really? Is it strange to do that? So yeah, you kind of had to take a step back as well, and kind of, because we're in that world, to kind of realize this is, a lot of this is not normal behavior.
Yeah. You talked a little bit at the top about some of the experiences that you had in trying to get a book published, and it wasn't initially this book, it was a version of this book, and some of the feedback you got is kind of is limiting, but not that surprising, I suppose, if you think about some of the preconceptions that people would have in this industry. I mean, just to put it in the context of this podcast, I think this is the 5th one so far that we've had that's had female guests. So I've worked in sports media for a fair old time, and it's not very gender balanced, put it that way. How do you reflect on that process, and you know, how does that tally up with some of the experiences that you've had in your careers up to this point?
Yeah, I mean, I think actually looking back, so initially we had been talking to publishers who were more au fait, had more experience in sports publishing. And what, in the end, we went with a publisher who publishes a lot of journalism non-fiction across a lot of topics, politics. And I think it took someone outside the sport to have, or outside this world completely, to have that vision of what this book could be and what were the kind of key things to pick out. I think there was also part of it was because the book was doing an awful lot of things. It wasn't, people didn't know where to put it. It didn't fit. So we don't have another book to compare this to. So we don't know how to market it or how well it would do or how well it would sell. I mean, contrast that with everybody that we spoke to for the book who said this book has been crying out to be written for years. Like, we're so excited. We can't wait for this book to be written. And the amazing feedback we've had. I mean, I think since it's been published, we have, and with the William Hill Sports Book of the Year Award shortlisting as well, we've definitely felt vindicated. But I think there is something about publishing, and probably publishing in general. It's probably not just sports publishing. If you talk to other authors, they will have similar experiences of, you kind of talk the talk about, oh, we need more women writers, we need more women sports writers, we need more women's stories told. But then if you're not actually kind of taking a chance on those things, they're never going to happen. You have to take a chance on it in order to show that there is a space for this book. And I think my most frustrating when we got the feedback about, you know, well, it's quite niche and no one, you know, we don't think there's a market for it. There are tons of books out there written by male ultra athletes, not just memoirs, but about men and endurance and about kind of all kinds of different aspects. So yeah, it was really frustrating and it felt quite ironic given the subject matter.
Yeah,
I think.
I mean, do you think as well there's a degree of, you know, women's sport and the growth of women's sport has been a talking point for the last 5 to 10 years in the wider sports industry and in sports media, and the ups and downs of that particular conversation are separate to the world of this book, really, because this is something that doesn't come from the sporting mainstream. But is it also a case of, well, this is actually what a women's sports story can look like? It can be something completely different from the boundary breaking in what's a kind of male defined world, if you see what I mean, in mainstream sport.
Yeah, and I think publishers like to play it safe. They want more of the same, you know, in any genre. And like Emma said, that, you know, they talk about diversity, but they don't actually act on it. You know, if you look at the William Hill Sports Book of the Year, you know, there may be like one female book, you know, every year, or one or two, but there's never like a suddenly there's loads of them, or the whole shortlist is females. And I don't think they get enough submitted. And that's because publishers are not commissioning enough books written by women. And yeah, I do think, you know, it was difficult to kind of explain exactly what this book was, and it was trying to do many different things. But in a way, that's kind of what's worked to its advantage when you read it, because it's not, you can't really go into it with any preconceptions. And we were trying to cover it from kind of lots of different angles. But yeah, it's still very much a man's world. And we certainly felt that at the awards. You know, all the other nominated books were written by white men who worked for national newspapers as sports writers. And we are none of those things. You know, we don't even live in London. So that's another thing. Like, there's definitely a London elite. And, you know, they're all fantastic writers and they're all doing fantastic work. But you've got to make room for more diversity. And if that means you have less books about cricket or football, then my God, so be it. You know, there is enough books out there on those kind of topics. I think publishers need to be brave, and it's changing, but change is very, very slow, and that's what can be quite frustrating. As a woman working in this space, is everyone says, "Oh, isn't it great? We're covering loads more women's sport," and when you look at it, yes, we're covering more, but it's still not a lot. And most of it is football, which drives me up the wall. As someone who has zero interest in football, women's sport does not mean women's football. And we can't just go, tick, we've done that, we've covered football, or tick, we've covered women's rugby. What about all those sports that the majority of women are involved in? Running, probably as a participation sport, there are far more women than there are men, yet most of the books and most of the journalists are male. Netball's another one. Obviously, I've played netball my whole life, and I feel like it's just this kind of forgotten sport. And yet the vast majority of girls play netball in school, and yet we still defer to women's football. We always defer to the sports that have always been in the male domain, and we feel like we've ticked a box because we've invited women into that male space. And it's like, well, what about those sports the women have actually been doing for a very long time and enjoy? Thank you very much. So yeah, I get on my hobby horse about this, because women's football, as great as it is not sport. It is just one of many, many different sports.
Yeah. What were your experiences of being on that William Hill shortlist, and just the sort of the whole process as first time sports authors, first time mainstream? Because you've written a book together, but it wasn't kind of a consumer publication.
Yeah, I mean, I think firstly we had no expectations. We knew our publisher was going to enter the book, and we hoped it would get somewhere. When we saw it on the long list, we were very excited. But yeah, we haven't written any of the sports books, kind of no expectations, no prejudgment. I think there were lots of people there at the awards who had written previous books, or, who had been, they're like, oh, have you been here before? No, I'm completely outside this world. But that's not to say that we didn't feel very welcome and supported when we were there. That's really important to say as well, I think. I think, we'd had great interviews with people who had read the book, went on TalkSport, and they had clearly read the book and had some fascinating questions. And, I think more of that, please. It was great. And I think making the shortlist was fantastic. And reflecting back on it, I don't know if people outside publishing would understand that, there is no kind of lobbying or mates, or our book has made it there on its merits. The books are there based on the writing, and there's different panels of judges at each stage. It's quite a in-depth process as well. And I think especially for us, nobody knew who I were. All these judges are picking up this book having no preconceived idea, or not having heard of it or heard of us. So I think that feels quite special, because it got to the shortlist purely on the basis of the writing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And was there value in that process for you? And will that shape or inform what you decide to do next?
Yeah, there's value certainly in feeling, like Emma said, kind of, validated that, that this was a book worth writing. It was important. And we had great feedback, and we certainly, have been having discussions with our publisher about republishing the book and some tweaks we might make to it. So it was great to get that kind of feedback, but I don't know that it would kind of change anything that we would do. I'm certainly not going to write a book about women's football just so I can get on the shortlist.
Yeah, I think it really does help for us, because, we're a small publisher. People don't really know who we are. So it's certainly amazing publicity for us. I think there are more stories and more books in this world, and we'll have to kind of try and plan what direction we take that in. And feedback from external kind of panels of book judges is actually really helpful to help inform that, I think, because you get, you speak to people who are not interested in running, who don't know anything about this, who've read your book, who can give a really honest opinion about what they liked about it, so yeah, that's all very, very useful.
Yeah. What do you think you will do next? Have you had those? I mean, whether it's together or independently, have you had those thoughts yet? Those conversations?
Yeah, we've having a few different conversations at the moment. I think it will be something in a similar vein. I mean, it won't be like. I mean, although have been lots more stories of women since we wrote the book, I think it will be more of a spin-off than a sequel. I do think further down the line there may be some kind of sequel that you could do because the science is so new at the moment, and we kind of need to wait a decent amount of time for the science to catch up and to kind of really have more robust data there. But yeah, I think it will be a spin-off of some sort in this world that we'll be looking at.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I look forward to all of that, and congratulations on all the success of the book to date. 3 questions that we ask our guests, and this is going to be really complicated now because I've only ever had one guest at a time before, so I don't know how we'll manage this. If you want to pick an order or what have you, but first one, do you have an origin story or something that sparked your interest in sport?
Well, mine's quite easy, I suppose. I didn't really do much sport at school, just like the basic PE stuff. Did a bit of dancing stuff. I was a very active kid, but just didn't really do kind of team sports. And I think in my early 20s, I was watching the London Marathon and said, like, to my family, "Oh, I'd like to do that." And they all laughed. And I've said this before, they all deny this ever happens. It definitely did happen. And that's why I signed up for my first half marathon. And then the rest is history.
Yeah. How about you, Lily?
Yeah, I think my gateway sport has always been netball. Just because I did it in school, I always really enjoyed it, and I played for the county, and then I carried it on into adulthood and just played in kind of local leagues. And actually, like I said, running came about because I wanted to be fitter for netball. And that I don't actually play netball anymore now because I'm too afraid of getting injured for running. But it's definitely, running. Netball for me was definitely kind of been that constant kind of up until, I guess, my late 30s, really. And now running's replaced that.
Yeah. What's your favourite piece of sports storytelling?
Okay, so I found this one quite hard. I just think from the world, like the journalism world that I come from, I really like something that's an investigation, that shines a light on an aspect of sport that is kind of lesser known, I suppose. Like I recently read an article about increasing problems of female athletes having stalkers. And I'm kind of fascinated with that kind of journalism.
Can you remember remember who did that?
That was in the New York Times sports pullout. So is it The Athletic, I think?
Could be, yeah.
And it's kind of a problem that's kind of growing and growing, and no one quite knows how to deal with it. But I think favourite piece of sports storytelling would probably be David Walsh. And I got to speak to him about this at the award ceremony, but his 7 Deadly Sins, the Lance Armstrong, I was always absolutely fascinated by the Lance Armstrong doping story. My family all watched Tour de France, and his book to me was just the fact that he kept just doggedly going when everybody else was like, no, there's nothing here, and he just would not give up. The way that he also writes that book and how he tells that story of him continuing to investigate this, I think is fascinating. So I'm going to say that one, even though it's quite old now.
Lily?
Yeah, I mean, I guess one of my favourite running authors, is a Darren Finn. And I love all his books, and I can't wait for his next one about his run around Ireland, which is coming out next year. I think The Way of the Runner, where he went to Japan, is probably my favourite of his. But the one I want to say that I think probably did plant a seed for me was a book called Just a Little Run Around the World by Rosie Swales. And this was a woman in her 50s who her husband died, and I guess part of her kind of bereavement process, she decided she was literally going to run self-supported around the world. And I think it took her like nearly 3 years. And it's not a book that many people know, but it's just this incredible story. And I just thought, gosh, if she could do that, and she had no money, just through sheer will and determination, then really, anybody can. So that's sort of that for me, I think, made me think, wow, I'd love to do something like that one day.
Very cool. What's a sports story that you'd like to tell or see someone else tell?
So I found this one quite difficult, but I am really obsessed at the moment with the drop-off in participation in sport in teenage girls.
Yeah.
Like, we know that happens. It's a long-standing issue that I don't think anybody has properly grappled with at all. All we do is kind of say the stats, but we never do anything to solve it. And I've got a 15-year-old daughter at the moment who does still do sport, but I can see it in her friends, and her PE teachers tell me. But not every country has this problem. So I was reporting on a study in Norway where they were looking at continued participation in sport for all children at the teenage level was linked to reduced rates of depression, because they have this like national system where everybody kind of is encouraged to they have this like funded sports clubs of loads of different sports. And especially team sport, I think, can build so much resilience and so much improvements in mental health. So I think there are countries that are doing a lot better at this. And I would like to read about how they do that and how that impacts, I think.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And I think, a lot of people, I was talking to my family, my wife's eldest niece is kind of coming up to that age. She's sport obsessed, but kind of coming up to that age where you're thinking, okay, does this hold now for her teens? And Lily, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I really love anything that does myth busting, and that's something I kind of try and do in my own work. But I'd love there to be, I think there's probably actually a book in this, but myth busting around all the kind of marketing BS you get in sport and all the products that are sold to us as they're going to do, this, that, and the other. And most of it is based on, really dodgy data, or it's really, being very selected very carefully. And most of the stuff is absolute rubbish. And I love the podcast Sliced Bread that does kind of deep dives into products, and it quite often does sports products. But yeah, I'd love to see, it's kind of given me an idea that like maybe I should write a book about it. But yeah, like a deep dive into
in your world, I'm sure you get quite a lot of that kind of.
Yeah, like all the time. And because I coach, I have runners coming to me saying, oh, I've just seen this product. Should I get some of it? And I'm like, no, just don't waste your money. Like, most of this is absolute rubbish. It's just trying to sell you something. Or it's very, very marginal gains. And, this might help an elite athlete, but it's not going to help you, get a 25-minute part run. So, yeah, we're just sold so much stuff all the time that we don't need. So I'd like to unpack all of that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look out for all of that stuff. Guys, you've been very generous with your time and really enjoyed the conversation and the book. And yeah, congratulations with everything you've managed in the last year, but thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Outlines is an original production for the 2640.